Hello, my name is John Abbott. I'm going to be presenting my research project in which I not only attempted to, but was successful at hacking my own car. We're all safer when the systems we depend on are inspectable, auditable, and documented, and this definitely includes cars. This is a quote by Chris Evans, who's a hacker and founder of Project Zero. Project Zero is Google's team of security analysts who are employed to find zero-day vulnerabilities in different systems. So cars on the road today, are they simply vehicles, or are they closer to being computers on wheels? I would say they're closer to the latter. They're far more advanced than when we first were manufacturing them, and even more advanced than what they were just a few years ago. As new technology is added and new features are installed, more components that control these features are additionally installed. In the early 2000s, the average vehicle had 1 to 2 dozen ECUs, or electronic control units. Today, that number can be as high as 50 to 90 units in a single vehicle. However, as technology has advanced at an incredibly fast rate in vehicles, one thing that has not kept the same pace is security. Security was not originally thought of as a strong necessity, mainly because the type of equipment needed to connect to vehicles to gain access to the internal systems was very expensive, often upwards of several thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So not many people were interested in pursuing this endeavor. Additionally, almost all the documentation for internal vehicle systems was flooded with the term proprietary, such as proprietary system or proprietary unit, proprietary protocol. This made it incredibly difficult to find actual documentation or information about these systems. Generally, the overall mindset of securing vehicles was security through obscurity, and it wasn't a bad security posture at that time. But as technology has changed, systems become less expensive. Those previously restricted from access could now have the means to gain access to the internal systems. Now the only hurdle seems to be the lack of documentation. But as more people begin hacking their cars, the documentation from reverse engineering is filling that gap. So with all the technology going into vehicles today, how do all the different components talk or communicate with each other? This is where the CAN and OBD come into play. The CAN is the controller area network that runs throughout the entire vehicle, connecting everything together. It works very similar to a computer network, but without the need for a centralized server to control each individual unit. It was developed as a means to replace heavy, bulky wire harnesses and is one of the 5 protocols used on the OBD, or onboard diagnostic system. This diagram shows on the left a vehicle without CAN, with many wires connecting multiple devices, and on the right, a vehicle with CAN. As you can see, it's much cleaner, and it's also much more cost effective than to have all that excess wire. CAN was developed by engineering company Bosch in 1985, and it became standardized by ISO 11898 in the 90s. However, vehicles equipped with full CAN systems did not really appear on the market until the early 2000s. As it developed further, it became established as the dominant protocol to use, and starting with the 2008 model year vehicles, any vehicle sold in the United States must use the CAN system. So we know that the CAN is used for each component to communicate with each other, but the onboard diagnostic system is how a vehicle monitors each component. It was first used in the 1980s when auto manufacturers began controlling engine functions electronically instead of mechanically. The main reason for this was to ensure proper EPA emission standards. In the mid-1990s, OBD2 was introduced, and it provided the most complete engine control and monitors every part of the vehicle from its chassis to all of its accessories and everything in between. And as the name implies, it provides diagnostic information for each component as well. Now on to vehicle hacking. But first a quick warning. Vehicle hacking should not be taken lightly or casually. Playing with the internal computer system and network can cause damage to it or even disable it permanently. When the average person hears about vehicle hacking, the image that most often comes to their mind is of an individual with malicious intent looking to cause harm to either the vehicle or the occupants of that vehicle. The general consensus is that it's a bad thing and that it's dangerous or it should be even criminalized. But there's a lot of good that can come from hacking a vehicle. So let's talk about some of the ways hacking a vehicle can be good. Over the years, the auto industry has produced some amazing vehicles, which contain very complex electronics and computer systems. However, very little has been released by the industry as to how many of these systems work exactly. As mentioned before, the term proprietary can be found across the majority of system documentation. This makes it hard for anyone outside the system's developers to really truly understand how they work. Hacking can help you understand how your vehicle works. This also leads to better understanding of how the electrical systems work. By understanding the electrical systems, it can be easier to add aftermarket parts or accessories and have them operate as if they were natively part of the vehicle. Vehicles aren't one size fits all anymore. There are many options available. Some aren't even documented or widely known. By hacking your vehicle, you could discover hidden features, like valet mode for instance, which could let you put your car in a sort of restricted state before handing the keys over to a valet. The main underlying theme in the auto industry is safety. Unfortunately, current safety guidelines don't adequately address cyber threats, and manufacturers are not required to audit the security of their vehicles' electrical systems, even though today's vehicles are just as vulnerable to the same malware and viruses as desktop computers. Hacking your vehicle can help to discover these vulnerabilities and learn what precautions you may need to take with your vehicle. It can also help raise awareness, which in turn helps the auto industry develop a better security posture and close certain vulnerabilities. It even helps the industry save more. By having people hack their own vehicles, auto manufacturers are essentially outsourcing their research and development for vehicle security. Closer to being a computer than just a mechanical machine, there are many vulnerabilities that do exist in vehicles. Many of them have been discovered and exploited by hackers and researchers, allowing them to do things such as stop vehicles while they're traveling down the highway, steering the vehicles in different directions, or even disabling the brakes. Thankfully, many of the hackers who have found them have released these vulnerabilities and methods they use to exploit them to the auto manufacturers. Many previous vulnerabilities have already been fixed. I'll discuss more of this in the next slide coming up. There is a human component to vulnerabilities. As long as humans are part of the equation, we won't ever have true security. Mainly because there's always going to be somebody who wants to find a way in, or somebody to break the system. Humans are curious by nature. If you were to write malicious code to a CD and label that CD as cool music or something to that effect, leave the CD in a parking lot, chances are pretty high that somebody will come along and put it in their vehicle just to see what's on it. As more people hack their vehicles, more information is being published about it, and the methods and tools used are released for anyone to come along and try themselves. This presents a double-edged sword, so to speak, in that others can use this information to learn from it and apply better security to their own vehicles, while some can take what's been done, see if it's patched, and possibly cause harm with it. So are vehicles still at risk and are they easy to hack? The answer to that is yes and no. Manufacturers have been taking steps to add more layers of security to their vehicles. Some have begun using forms of cryptography for messages being sent over the CAN by changing the bytes in the messages by increasing them or decreasing them 1 byte. Some have implemented a checksum value at the end of each message so that the system will disregard any injected command or code if it doesn't have the correct checksum. Manufacturers are starting to become a little more reactive to the hacking events as well. For example, an academic research team from the University of California at San Diego were able to remotely connect to a vehicle through its OnStar system and activate the brakes while it was traveling at a high speed. Shortly after receiving the research team's findings, GM patched the OnStar system so that can't happen again. Another example, in 2014, two hackers by the names of Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek discovered that their Jeep Cherokee was internally connected to the Sprint network via a cellular connection. In digging deeper, they discovered that all the connected vehicles made by Chrysler had an IP address beginning with either 21 or 25. They also discovered that a specific port was open and always listening for a connection. They were able to exploit this connection and remotely attack their own Jeep. They released their findings to Chrysler, who immediately had Sprint block that port for all their connected IPs, and then recalled 1.4 million Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep vehicles within just a few days of being told about the discovered vulnerability. It was the largest automobile recall due to a hacking event. So in terms of connecting to a vehicle in order to exploit any vulnerabilities, I'm going to be talking about three main methods of connectivity: direct connection, Wi-Fi, and cellular. Direct connection is probably the easiest method of hacking a vehicle, but it's also the hardest, as it requires physical access to the interior of the vehicle. No expensive or complex hardware is needed for this type of connection to be established. By simply using a laptop, Arduino, or Raspberry Pi, an OBD2 to serial or USB cable, and free software, you can have that connection. The underlying vulnerability here is that the CAN is a trusted network, in that it views messages on the network as coming from trusted devices. For example, if an ECU receives an engine message, it thinks, "Hey, you're obviously the engine because you're sending me an engine message." By connecting a device that runs Linux, you have native support for the CAN, as the Linux kernel has CAN support built in via Socket CAN. Socket CAN is a connection of open source CAN drivers. They enable your device to become more of a plug-and-play component instead of having to configure all sorts of drivers and running any special code to configure the right connection. With Wi-Fi becoming more and more common in vehicles, this opens up another avenue for attack. Vehicle Wi-Fi is geared more for allowing software updates to the vehicle without having to stop at a dealership, and to send diagnostics to dealerships and service stations during repairs. Cellular connectivity is also more common in vehicles as well. This is not for making and receiving calls, but to have continuous internet connection for extended features. For example, my personal vehicle has a smartphone app that I can remotely start or stop the engine, lock or unlock the doors, and be in any location while doing this. I can also get information about the vehicle, such as its fuel level or the hybrid battery charge level. Some vehicles are even taking this type of connection a step further and providing full internet services, such as web browsing, social media, Twitter and Facebook, and media streaming, Pandora and Spotify. With these services, the vehicle also becomes more open to the same type of vulnerabilities that regular computers have, such as malware and viruses. So, hacking my vehicle. My vehicle is a 2017 Ford Fusion Energy Sport Edition. It's a plug-in hybrid with both a gas engine and electric motor. It has a lot of built-in technology, making it a very interesting target with a lot of potential for attack. Initially, to establish a connection with my vehicle, I decided on trying the least expensive route, and used a simple ELM to USB cable, specifically the ELM 327 dongle. It's a programmed microcontroller produced by ELM Electronics for translating the onboard diagnostic system. With it, I was able to read CAN traffic, but only in small batches at a time. I was not able to get a live stream of messages. I discovered that this cable and device are too slow, as they're not really designed for CAN communications. During further research, I discovered a device called a CANtact. Here's what that device looked like. It's a small device specifically designed to translate CAN messages and is compatible with Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So I purchased one at around $60. I connected it via USB to my MacBook Pro and virtualized Ubuntu Linux, connecting the other end via serial cable to the OBD2 port in my car. I decided on Linux due to its built-in native support of CAN and used Terminal. The only software I had to install was called CAN Utils, which is a collection of utility used to read and write to the CAN network. Using the utility CAN dump, I was able to see a live stream of all the CAN device IDs and messages being transmitted by my vehicle. So many messages are sent at such a fast rate that you really can't figure out easily what's going on. Just try reading several hundred hexadecimal messages every second. It's hard. To make it easier, I used another utility called CAN Sniffer. It's similar to CAN dump in that it shows all the CAN messages. However, the device IDs that don't update frequently, it hides. This cleans up the screen a lot and makes it easier to figure out what's really going on the network. It also has a feature to change the color of each byte that changes, so you can see it a lot easier. This helps to see the change in the ID when you do something like open a window or close a window, open a door, press a button. The hardest part at this point is trying to figure out what each ID relates to in the vehicle and what each byte in each message does. Every auto manufacturer uses proprietary hex codes and ID numbers. For example, ID 610 on one vehicle may be for monitoring that vehicle's speed, while on another manufacturer it may be to turn on the interior lights. Little to no documentation of this actually exists outside of what people who have hacked their cars have been discovering and releasing. So the method I went with was to sit in my car, watching the messages with CAN Sniffer, and pushing all the buttons to see what messages change, and then replay those messages back to the CAN network through code injection. For the code injection, I used the utility CAN Send. The utility shows up in Linux as a network device. In my case, it shows up as CAN 0. So to inject a code, it would look something like this. Using the CAN Send command, followed by the network device you're using, in this case CAN 0, and then the CAN device ID that you want to send the message to, in this case 123, then pound, and the message in 8-byte form. This example, 11223344. By capturing different messages and replaying them back to my vehicle, I was able to do things like open and close the windows, turn on the high beams, and even cause the horn to continuously blow after turning the car off. I was also successful in temporarily disabling my vehicle. In the next slide I'll discuss that further, as well as talk about another utility that caused an interesting thing to happen while injecting code. So hacking my car was very fun. I learned a lot and still have much more to learn. I also learned how to disable my car. I did this by performing a simple denial of service or DOS attack, all using a small bit of Python code. On the left is the code used for the DOS attack. In the CAN, the device identifier with the lowest number always takes priority. So in this case, I just sent the CAN with an empty message with an ID of 0 and told it to continuously send that message. This caused every possible fault message to display on the dashboard and infotainment screen. One of my favorite fault codes to display was engine not found. My car seemed to think that it lost its engine. Due to the flood of empty messages, I wasn't able to actually start the vehicle. Thankfully, I was able to fix this, though, by using the code you see on the right. It cleared the vehicle's MIL, or malfunction indicator lamp, and cleared out all fault messages. Thankfully this worked, otherwise I would have had to tow my car to the Ford dealership and have them figure out. That would have been expensive. So a word of caution, if you're going to hack your own vehicle, make sure you know how to undo anything that you may do to it, or become very friendly with your local dealership. So I initially expected hacking my vehicle to take a lot of time. It definitely can. Reverse engineering or figuring out what hexadecimal messages does what is a lengthy process, and I expected this to take a lot of effort. Not having a strong background in vehicle mechanics or even software coding, I was expecting a steep challenge. During my initial research for this, I discovered that using Arduino and a specialized shield you can easily connect to your CAN seemed pretty straightforward, but it would also require a lot of programming on the Arduino to add the correct drivers and setting everything up. Then I discovered the CAN Tact, which I showed earlier, and found it was a much easier way to connect to the CAN and didn't really require any sort of configuration. This made it even more of a plug-and-play sort of system. I wasn't really expecting it to be as easy as it was. That being said, I feel I've only begun to scratch the surface on hacking my vehicle, and know there's a whole lot more to be discovered. So a real unexpected thing that happened while playing around with another CAN utility occurred while I was connected to another vehicle that I own, a 2015 Toyota Highlander XLE. Using the utility CanGen, you can specify any message you want to be sent to randomly generated CAN device IDs. So with my wife driving the vehicle around, I decided to test out this utility with the command you see here. I only ran it for a few seconds as to not cause any potential serious issues to the vehicle. I inadvertently discovered a feature on the vehicle. The message, "Adjusting front radar beam," kept displaying on the dashboard. We don't have radar on our vehicle, or even a pre-collision system. But somehow, by sending that random message, it enabled the software configuration of it. My wife became a little concerned because the message would not go away. Even if we tried to clear it, it would still pop back up. In the end, it actually corrected itself after we turned the vehicle off and came back to it later in the day. I ran the same command on my Ford Fusion, but nothing interesting has popped up. Yet. I plan on running it several more times to see what will happen. So a big lesson learned was hacking a vehicle does not require specialized skills. Using inexpensive hardware that can easily be purchased online, anyone with basic computer and web browsing skills can easily hack into a vehicle, at least with a direct connection. So moving forward, I plan on continuing to attack my vehicle and see what more I can learn from it. I also want to learn how to connect remotely through both the Wi-Fi and the cellular connection, and what vulnerabilities that they may have, with my car specifically. My future goals are to explore more attack methods, develop remote attacks, hopefully develop ways to secure and patch these vulnerabilities, and to communicate any vulnerabilities found and the methods I use to exploit them to Ford. I also want to try to get a copy of my vehicle's infotainment software so that I can embed code or change something in it and have my vehicle auto-update that to that software that I've edited through its built-in Wi-Fi process. If possible, I'll then try to add new features to the system, such as displaying more vehicle parameters on its display, such as the tachometer or the air intake pressure. I also want to see if I can change some of the factory buttons to do other commands. Additionally, I want to add a Raspberry Pi or Arduino to my vehicle to connect it further to my home automation features and network. I would like to also be able to use the in-dash display as a screen to control either the Raspberry Pi or the Arduino. So here are the resources I used for my project. For any of you interested in hacking your own vehicles, I'd recommend a few specific ones, such as The Car Hacker's Handbook by Craig Smith, DEF CON videos on YouTube of Charlie Miller and Chris Velasek presenting their research, and the articles on Wired.com written by Andy Greenberg. I hope you've all enjoyed my presentation, and I thank you for your time.